The Auckland of the future will have higher density housing and some more urban sprawl. A revised version of the Unitary Plan has been unveiled by an independent hearings panel. It recommends nearly 60% of the city be zoned for higher density housing. Now that's 2 or 3 stories high. It says the new zonings for the city must provide for all of the 422,000 additional dwellings needed in the next 24 years. Umbrella Group, the Character Coalition, says they're shocked and disappointed, and the density is much greater than Aucklanders expected. I think one of the mayoral candidates, Mark Thomas, saying something similar. But what about the developers? Well, property developer Mark Todd of Akld Residential is sitting beside me in the studio. Mark, welcome to the studio. Well, nice to have you here.
Oh, thanks very much.
Right, let's declare a vested interest. You make money out of building development, so let's put that on the table and move on. Why are people so scared of high density housing in what we call, and I don't want to use this term facetiously, but it's a good shorthand, the leafy suburbs? What do they fear?
They fear apartment blocks, bona fide apartment blocks turning up in their backyard, which is not what the Unitary Plan's talking about. In fact, the large majority of the residentially zoned land has still got single house development controls of 2 stories and 35 to 40% coverage.
So what would they look like? The sort of thing that you just described then, 2 stories, 35 to 40% coverage, what does that look like?
Well, we've taken a general general stock standard suburb. You're looking at, over the next 30 years, that suburb having more houses, but exactly the amount of green space that's been retained under current development practices, which are not protecting our suburban environments. Currently, our suburbs are being filled with long driveways, right-of-ways, snaking to individual garages, and our suburban environment's been covered with concrete over the last 20 years. You just go and look at Mount Albert or Panmure or Epsom or Orakei. There's driveways for Africa.
Okay, so you're saying, in fact, there is much to not be nostalgic about over what's happened in Auckland.
Exactly. And we're not losing green space, and that's the message we need to get out there to the public. The density rules which we've had for the last 30 years haven't protected our suburban environment from bad quality development. The new rules, the new metric for protecting urban amenity is the retention of green space, and that's been enshrined across 70% of Auckland's residentially zoned land is going to have just as much green space as it has now. But what we are going to be able to do is provide smaller 1, 2 and small 3-bedroom houses that respond better to the social, economic and financial needs of Auckland families.
Okay. Once again, you're making that sound a little bit philanthropic, and we'll put on the table that this is what you do for a living. But having said that, we're in Central City, we're in Hobson Street, and anyone who knows Hobson Street in Auckland knows that there are some pretty unattractive apartment buildings. Although working here now, I see the people who live in there come and go, and I've become much fonder of them because they're humanised by their occupants, right? But they're ugly.
Oh, worse than that, they're economic vandalism. They're appalling. I'm not here to defend that type of intensification.
So if someone's listening in St Heliers, are they going to have one of those over their back fence? I mean, is that the worst possible scenario that people fear?
No, there's just there's a fear factor around the word unlimited density. What we have got is, bulk and location controls have been in the suburban environment for 30 years. You can build to a certain height, a certain distance from your boundary, you can cover a certain amount of the land. But the density rules say you can build 1 house per 400 square metres. So in Panmure you might get a 180 square metre house, and in Epsom you might get a 350 square metre house. What the new rules say is that 350 square metres can be 4 80 square metre 2-bedroom units in the same shape and size, except all the car park can be together, so there'll be more green space on site. So what we've actually opened up, the development community at the moment has been economically precluded from building smaller houses in the suburban environment. And that's the environment where it's easiest to meet affordability criteria. High-rise apartments are expensive to build. Low-rise suburban character flats are cheap, and they can be built throughout the suburban environment, retaining just as much green space as we've got now.
If we look at those figures, though, they want to provide for 422,000 additional dwellings in the next 2 or 3 decades. Are there anywhere near the kind of builders and tradespeople required to do that sort of work, to do that kind of building?
It's a tough ask, but again, the suburban environment is the best. You've got the best chance of doing it because small family builders can build clusters of 4 to 8 character flats or micro apartments, of 2 to 3 stories. You don't need a large construction company to build the type of housing we're talking about in our suburban neighbourhoods, which is really a modern interpretation of, character flats, which you all love in Mount Eden and Herne Bay and St Heliers and Sandringham.
When you turn up in a community that hasn't had one of your apartment buildings before, what's the highest apartment building you've built?
6 stories.
Okay, when you turn up in a community that hasn't had one of those before, is there initially panic?
Well, I've only built those in city fringe environments, and they're built in mixed-use business zone land. What we're talking about here is I don't want to associate genuine 4 to 6 story apartment blocks. They're not going to sprout up in Birkenhead or Point Chev or Henderson or Papatoe. That's just not going to happen. What we're talking about is, is better use of the available bulk and location.
So the people who are saying, we've got 1 minute for you to answer this question, the people who are saying you developers will destroy the character of our neighbourhoods, what do you say back?
I'd say all the special character areas have been retained. There's a pre-1944 demolition control that's been thrown out, but by and large, all the existing character environments, and Auckland's got some of the most unique housing in the world with our wooden suburbs. I mean, they're all still protected. There's nothing to fear in that department, and we're going to retain green space as we build more houses in the same number of hectares.
What about traffic?
Well, I mean, the sooner the streets are full of cars, the better. Then public transport's the only option, but...
Mark Todd, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Mark Todd of Ockham Residential, a counterpoint to some of the stuff we were hearing from residents' associations after 5 o'clock. Appreciate it, Mark.